In this session, we will learn about a few basics of deep learning, their applications, and learn how to apply these concepts using H2O3 via a hands-on session. Let's begin by introducing our speaker for the day. Sayam Bhutani is a machine learning engineer and an AI content creator at H2.ai. He just won the HackerNoon Contributor of the Year 2020 award for machine learning and the tutorial category. He's an Inc. 42 Economic Times recognized machine learning practitioner. He is an active Kaggle, where he ranks in the global top 1% in all categories. He's also the host of the Chai Time Data Science podcast, where he interviews top practitioners, researchers, and Kagglers. A few logistics before I pass it on to Sayam. This presentation is being recorded. A copy of the recording and slide deck will be sent to you in the next day. You can send us your questions throughout the session. We will be very happy to answer them towards the end of the session. With that, Sayam, the stage is yours.
Thank you, SK. I'll take a second to remember how to share my screen because every time I forget that. Okay, I think I got it this time. Great. Thanks for the introduction, Saurabh. Hi everyone, I'm Sayam Bhutani. Thank you for joining live, or if you're watching the recording, welcome to the recording. I drink a lot of chai and get excited about a lot of things. Deep learning is one of my favorite topics, so I'm really excited to be diving into this. I'm going to be covering few basics of deep learning in a top-down fashion. So that means covering a few applications and seeing how things work nicely together using H2O3. And I'll just dive into that. So a few words about H2O.ai. I'm wearing the Makers Gonna Make t-shirt very proudly, and our goal at H2O.ai is democratizing AI. That's through working with different industries, working with the community, and creating AI for good. A few numbers about us, and I would also like to point out our products. So if you're interested in our open source products, Driverless AI or H2O Wave, which is the up and coming business platform, please feel free to find me after the meetup or just chat with me online. Would be more than happy to talk about this. Or if you're interested in making your company an AI company or being a part of the team, I know we have a few openings. Please feel free to reach out afterwards if you're interested. That's my trick to finding people, making people talk to me online because, well, now you know. So the agenda for today's meetup is as follows. I'd like to talk about deep learning basics very briefly, not too much theory. The goal is to have minimal amount of theory and dive into training a neural network. I'm going to be using the H2O3 framework. There are many open source frameworks. For no reason, I decided to go with H2O3 just because I think it fits nicely with this tutorial, which again will show you how to put these Lego blocks together and give a few basics through, get a few basics through of how can you work with these terms, what exactly is a neural network, what are hidden layers, so on and so forth. Briefly touching on deep learning applications and leaving you with a few resources on where to go from here. So I'll start by giving an overview of deep learning. What exactly is it? What does the term even mean? And share a few jargon so that it isn't complete Greek while starting out. And if you're familiar with these terms, that's also fine. I'll not go into too much depth, just a brief brush up for people that aren't too familiar with these. What exactly is deep learning? If you look at the Venn diagram towards the right, deep learning isn't a superset of AI. It isn't a superset of machine learning either. I would say it's a subset of machine learning that really intersects nicely with different applications of the field. It's one of the most up and coming applications of machine learning. The recent applications have been very exciting. At least since 2015, we've seen an upsurge of this being used across industries, across our customers, and in general on the internet as well. A majority of the things that we see being served to us through an app, through the internet, I would argue use deep learning to some extent. So the word deep learning, it comes from deep neural networks. Now you might ask, what is a neural network or what is an artificial neural network? Let's take a look at that. Deep learning or AI itself is based on the fact that we're trying to mimic a human brain. So we're trying to create an artificial brain. That's the longest term goal. That's been the longest term goal since the day one of this field. We're very far away from that. But I would say deep learning is a good step in that direction. Still very far from the big goal, but what we're trying to do is create an artificial neural network, create an artificial brain, and that's the foundation of these deep neural networks. So the single Lego block or the single foundation is a single neuron in our brain. And as you might expect, it's called a neuron or a perceptron in a deep neural network. How do these work? These work on a theory called universal approximation theorem. The details are somewhat math heavy. I'll skip that, but the end goal is if we stack plenty of these together, and we'll just get to what stacking means. But if we're able to put together these neurons, these artificial layers of mathematical units that we're using to mimic the brain, we should be, in theory, be able to approximate anything or use it for predicting cats and dogs or hot dogs or not hot dogs. So here's an image of the human neuron versus an artificial neuron. Perceptron is somewhat equivalent. It's of course not the same, but it tries to mimic the human neuron. And a large collection of these end up forming a deep neural network. So we have a few inputs similar to the human neuron going into the cell, the perceptron cell. And from that, we have an output coming out, assuming we perform a few functions inside. So how do we train these, or how do we get from this single neural network? And honestly, that's all the theory you need to know. That's all of the details that are there in a neural network or in a deep learning system. You stack all of these together, apply a few tricks, and you get a state of the art model across different fields. There are some nuances, of course, that I'm skipping, but if you know this, you can almost get started with applying these. So let's break down how do we train these networks to get an understanding of how these works. So in theory, let's say our model, and I'll use the term model, deep neural network, and ANN interchangeably. They are referring to the same thing. So deep neural network is just a machine learning model. It's an artificial neural network model. We give it some input, we get some output. Hopefully that output is okay and doesn't end up costing a lot of dollars. It works okay and can be put in the industry. That's the end goal. But we don't start with that. So when we are training this model to become highly accurate, we pass on an input and get an output from it. But this output isn't always accurate. So whenever we're talking about accuracies, the difference or how accurate a model is based on the fact that what values are we expecting out of it versus what values is it uh, spitting out. This difference cause is error. It's called error, or that's how accurate your model is. And we want this to be as accurate as possible. So once we know the outputs, and this is while we're training the neural network, we'd like to tune our model to become more accurate. So remember that image of a single neuron? It has some numbers inside of it that are called weights. We'd like to adjust them so that the output changes in a format that the errors go down and our model becomes more accurate. That is known as a backward pass. So the forward pass is passing the data through the model and passing the errors back to it. Updating them is known as a backward pass. That's how we train a model. Let's look at an example. If we're trying to predict a dog image, I don't know why people start with cat images. I'm not a cat person, but let's assume all of us are dog persons. We have a neural network, a simplified version of it, and we're trying to make our model predict if the image has a dog or not. And let's assume this just has 4 pixels. So here is our input layer, which is named X1 to X4, which is connected to the hidden layers. So whatever input goes in here is multiplied or added with a number that is stored in the hidden layers and gets passed on to the next layers. Further, we change a few numbers, we perform a few matrix multiplications, and it gets passed further on, and we get a prediction. It's not a yes or no, it's usually a probability. Let's say your image has a 90% dog, and that's how these models work. It's safe to say your input image has a dog in that case. Again, this is a simplified version, but most of these models are based on this particular example. So depending on whatever input image or input you throw at these models, you get a prediction, and you'd want to tune them to make them more accurate. I'll just get to deep learning, and I'm excited to do a hands-on session. But before that, I'd also like to share a few jargons. And again, to remind you, this is a fast-paced session because I assume you know some theory, and I'd like to brush up on some of these concepts. But you should be able to find all of these details on our training resources or even in general. So what exactly are these jargons that I just mentioned in a rush? What is a neuron? What is a layer? What does training even mean? And is there any other details? Are there any other details to making these work effectively? Because I made it sound too simple. Spoiler alert, it isn't. It does take a lot of efforts. Let's look at the jargon. So as we are training these models, all of these inputs and outputs are essentially numbers. So our model basically is a collection of matrices. It's a collection of numbers. As we pass on our input, let's say X is a matrix. It contains the dog image. And computers are dumb machines in the sense that they only read and understand zeros and ones, or some numbers that eventually get broken down to zeros and ones. So all of the data that's going in and coming out is a representation of numbers or some other representation that later down the path gets converted to these numbers. So inside the model, we pass on an input which gets multiplied and added to these matrices, which are stored inside of our model. These are known as the weights. And the trick to making these work nicely is including an activation function. What is an activation function? It's just a non-linearity. Turns out if you keep adding and multiplying matrices, it's not enough to get these things to work. So an activation function, think of it like inside your brain. If you've studied biology, you might remember there's an activation energy that is needed for in order to the signal to go through your brain or your neurons. This activation function is, I would say, a poor replication of that. It filters out some signal from noise, passes on some values ahead, and you get an output. So the loss is the difference of this predicted value and the expected value. There are different representations of this. The most simplified version is literally the difference of the predicted values minus the expected values. When we are training the model, we're adjusting these weights, these zeros and ones matrices with which our input interacts in a way to reduce them to get the highest accuracy. Weight adjustment usually is done through stochastic gradient descent. That's an algorithm. I'll give a brief overview of it. You can look at the math, but that's not really important, at least initially, to understanding on how these models work. And a few advanced techniques are helpful in avoiding overfitting. Overfitting happens when your model, not you, your model just learns about the data set that is there in training and doesn't really work for the real world, which is a bummer because that does happen a lot of times, and we see these errors where you put in a cat image and it says horse. It's a meme, but it does happen in the real world as well, and you wouldn't want to see that scenario. So you'd also like to apply a few checks, a few techniques to avoid overfitting. Essentially, all of the weights can be plotted against the cost function or the errors. What we would like to do is minimize the error, and assuming it's a simplified representation of a parabola, you could minimize your weight, your initial weight, to the minimum, or at least try to do that. And this requires some calculus, which I will very happily skip because I don't want to go through that level of math in this presentation. But essentially, when we're applying stochastic gradient descent, you'd like to minimize the gradients in a way that your weights achieve the minimum cost. Another jargon that I'd like to uncover is overfitting versus underfitting. In a simplified representation, when you are training a model, it's similar to fitting a curve across data points. In a 2D world, because data can be 3D, in a 2D world, you'd like to draw a single line through all of these points in the X and Y axis dimensions. Underfitting happens when the estimated curve poorly fits these points. And balanced is when it nicely fits through it. Overfitting happens when you just fit across the training data and you don't work nicely across the general world or the test data. So you work really nicely, your model works really nicely with the training data, but it doesn't work in the real world. You'd want to avoid these situations. What is a balanced fit? Of course, you don't have 2D data always and you can't plot it so nicely. So it's important to understand how can you avoid these situations. That was a very brief overview of all of these jargons. And now I'd like to again show how you can apply these and how these terms work in a hands-on manner, or how where do you see these values? How do you realize that you're overfitting or not? So for this tutorial, I'm using the H2O3 library. And if you'd like to follow along, you could head over to training.h2o.ai and you could just sign up through any of the courses. You should be able to find this particular notebook that I'm referring to. If you go head over to AI and ML Foundations courses, this notebook is actually derived from that. Or we'll circulate it after the webinar as well, if you're watching the recording. So in this tutorial, what I'm in this hands-on walkthrough, what I'm trying to demo is what are these jargons that I just referred to. A simple problem, which is a prediction problem based on a simple toy data set. And what I'll try to demo here is we'll take this data set of a few details of different car models, spoiler alert, build a basic neural network and see how we can improve upon it, or how do these different jargons or things we just learned about affect the training or are helpful. The different steps, to remind you, and these are true to training any model, include importing the frameworks, preparing the data, understanding the parts of the model, and training the model, finally interpreting these. What goes on behind these details? Let's take a look at that. So the first thing I've done is I've imported the H2O deep learning estimator, which again lives inside of H2O.estimators. H2O3 is a collection of a lot of algorithms. We're just looking at the deep learning one, so I'm particularly importing from the deep learning module, submodule inside of the estimators module. I've gone ahead and initialized an instance. So this creates a local server on my laptop because I'm right now using a laptop. And that is enough for us to get started with the deep learning functions. So let's start by building a single neural network and passing on this data set. So the data set that I'm looking at includes a few car models. Uh, it's actually funny. I find it very funny that working on these problems, you actually tend to go down these rabbit holes, funny things you Google at 3 a.m. So I was expecting the AMC Ambassador car model to look like the version of Ambassador cars that we have in India. That turns out that's not true. And these are cars from 60s or 70s. again, interesting stuff you end up Googling at 3, 4 a.m. So this data set contains details of different car models, their mileage, cylinder. So these are the number of cylinders that exist in the engines of these cars, displacement, power, their weight, acceleration, years in which they were made. Somewhat interesting stuff, I would argue. And how I set up this problem is I've imported this particular data set and set the value that we're trying to predict to cylinders. So based on the details we input to our model, which are displacement, power, weight, acceleration, and here we'd like to predict the number of cylinders. This might not be an exciting problem, but I wanted to create this for this tutorial so you can again take this knowledge and apply it to any other data set. There's no particular, which is also to mention that there's no particular reason for picking this data set. I just found it interesting enough and it worked okay for this demo. So for any model, you'd like to specify 3 things, which is the input. So the data set that you want to input to it, the dependent variable or what you're trying to predict, and error. As you might notice, we haven't passed on any error metric or anything else here. That's because we can call it afterwards. You can also pass it on here, and you can look at the API details in the documentations as well on how to do that. But this is also to show that there are a few defaults that are being taken care of. So we tell our model, which is cars underscore deep learning, and we pass on to the train function the x values, y values, and the data set. Just doing that once gives us an okay enough accuracy. But what have we really done here? So what has happened behind the scenes is we've requested the H2O deep learning estimators instance to please create a model for us that takes these values and predicts the cylinders. And it does so with a mean squared error value of 0.13. To remind you, this is not accuracy, this is not percentages, and the smaller number means better. And we're not trying to optimize the error value here. You could do that with some tweaking. I'm just trying to showcase and build on top of this. So a lot of things would have happened behind the scenes. And let's start by unwrapping this and adding a few details. Basically, behind the scenes, a collection of these would have been created. But how can we make it better, or how can we play around with this model? Let's look at adding activation layers. So if you remember, I had mentioned the universal approximation theorem based on which these models operate, deep learning models. An activation function or an activation layer exists between these few layers. So different layers of neurons. And the sole job of this is to add a non-linearity. There are different functions. Some of them are more famous, some of them are not so famous. And here's a quick overview of them. So an identity function literally passes on the value like so. A binary function passes on 0 and 1 depending on a few conditions. The one I've used is tanh. I think I had failed this class in high school, so I won't go through the mathematical definition. But as you can see, it's not a linear function. What's happening is we pass on an input and you get a different y value out of it. And this change is enough to help our model get trained better or help approximate values better. H2O3 supports tanh and all of these functions. So what I've done is I mentioned tanh. You could try changing these values just to get a hang of it, and you'll get different results. What is epochs? So now, as I've created a training data set and passed it to our estimator, our deep learning model, which is named cars underscore DL, our model will look at the data multiple times. So if you remember the training step that I had mentioned briefly, your data set is passed through the model multiple times as it learns about this. So I've requested deep learning estimators to please look at the dataset for 15 times. So we're running 15 epochs. If you want these results to be replicable, you'd want to set a seed as well. So I've done that. This avoids some randomness. And for good reason, I've set a train valid split of 80-20%. This improves our accuracy a bit. So now we know that adding activation functions is helpful. How do these work, or how are the details lined up? You could go through these, but what I would advise is just changing this to different values, changing it to ReLU, um, identity, binary step. If it doesn't exist in the API, you could try implementing them and see how do these interact. So that'll give you a better understanding, in my opinion. But as you can see, we have gone down from, okay, we have actually gone up in the error value. So turns out it didn't work nicely. So we learned that tanh doesn't work nicely for this problem. Again, this is a toy problem and you might want to experiment, but it's good to know that adding different activation functions also affects your values. It could hurt your model as well. Another nuance or another jargon. So as I'm going through this repeated walkthrough, what I'm doing is I'm creating the same estimator for the same data set and slowly introducing more terms. So we just learned about activation and epochs. Let's take a look at the hidden layers. So if you remember this image of predicting a dog, there was something happening inside of this neural network right here. And these are known as the hidden layers. The reason these are called hidden is we have an input layer and output layer, and we don't get to see what's happening behind these. So just for that reason, these are called hidden layers. Scientists aren't the best and the most creative with naming terminologies. So that's that. So we have hidden layers, and I'd also like to introduce dropout. So what I've done here is I've defined a hidden layer of 200 by 200 size, and you could simply do that by telling it hidden list of 200 and 200 along with dropout ratios. What is dropout? To avoid overfitting, there are a lot of different techniques that you could use. Dropout randomly deletes these connections that exist. So think of deleting any arrow randomly, or to quote a famous course, think of the model being drunk. So it tends to forget a few things. And why would you want to do that? This is actually helpful in avoiding overfitting. Now you wouldn't want to set this up to 1.0, 50% means, or 0.5 means that with a 50% probability, any connection might get deleted, and hopefully this helps avoid overfitting. That's the reasoning behind it, or motivation behind applying this. So we have taken the same model again from earlier. This time we've changed the activation function to tanh with dropout because we're applying dropout. Because we're applying dropout, it may not train as fast. So what I've done is I've increased the epochs to 20. Hopefully that helps a bit, and defined hidden layers. Turns out our model doesn't get to the highest accuracy as earlier. And the reason I think of this is that I can think why this is happening is dropout requires training your model for longer. So you could try increasing, as a tip, you would always want to increase epochs as you increase the dropout ratio. So now we know, just to recap, what is a model, the inputs and outputs that go out of it, epochs, hidden layers, and dropout. To visualize, this is how dropout works. It essentially makes a lot of the hidden nodes or different nodes inactive by deleting these connections. So if your model was overfitting because of this particular one connection, this is somewhat helpful in avoiding that. Now in the real world, if you had noticed so far, we were loading the complete data set into the memory. That's almost impossible unless you're working with this particular data set containing instances of Ambassador cars and their cylinders. So what you would want to do that is, what you would want to do there is break your data set down into small batches or small chunks that are big enough to fit in your computer's memory or your EC2 memory, your instances memory, so that you could train a model based on these. We computer scientists usually like numbers that are multiples of 2. So you might see a lot of 32, 64, 128, 256 going on. There's again no particular reason. I try to max this number out to a number where it fits really nicely in my instances memory. So bigger is better here. And you could define this by simply passing on this particular argument to our deep learning estimator mini batch size. And as expected, it gives us the same value. But this is important for instances where your data set cannot fit into the memory and you'd want to increase it or decrease it into smaller chunks and feed them into the memory. So as I'm going through this tutorial, you could take a note of how these things work nicely together and how can you pass on different arguments to the deep learning estimator to use them. I would also argue that once you know all of these technical jargons or these details, the framework isn't important. I'm just using H2O3 because it works okay for this demo. Once you get a hang of these, and it takes some effort, I don't think this tutorial would be enough. You could look at the documentation of any framework that you would like to use or your company would like to use, and it should work nicely. Most of the times, the arguments also don't change a lot. So let's take a look at another term, which is known as learning rate. As I had mentioned earlier, neural networks are trained by this algorithm known as stochastic gradient descent. But if you had observed the image I had shown here, our weights are being updated and hopefully being moved towards the right direction, which is the minima. One thing is missing here from this image, which is how fast can we upgrade or update these weights? And that's a hyperparameter. What are hyperparameters? Values that we decide. So far, we've been deciding number of epochs, hidden layers, hidden dropout ratios, mini batch sizes. So learning rate is another hyperparameter, which helps us decide how fast can we train a neural network. This takes some experience, but you wouldn't want to set a high learning rate because then your model wouldn't train. If you set up a very low learning rate, it will get trained eventually, but you might want to have 5-6 cups of chai in the meantime. Ideally, you'd want a good learning rate that doesn't make your model non-functional and trains fast enough. What's a good value? I don't know. You find these values out through experimentation and through looking at the values, at the error values. So it turns out setting a learning rate, and you can do so by passing on the rate argument. I've set a learning rate of 0.01, usually values in the range of 0.1 to 0.0001. So 10 to the power minus 1 to 10 to the power minus 4 are selected in most cases, along with whatever number of epochs you select, and they should work nicely. If you remember, we didn't set any of these values in the first instance. So most of the frameworks also come in with default values that someone would have experimented upon, hopefully, and set them. So you would also want to look at those particular values to judge how are those working nicely, or are those values worth using. How do you get a hang of these things? You'd want to experiment a lot. So here we've set the number of epochs, hidden layers, dropout ratios, along with the learning rate. And we get to a mean squared error of 0.21. Something that has been missing so far, and I've talked about overfitting and underfitting, is how can we avoid overfitting? So regularization techniques are used to avoid overfitting. There are a lot of these. the two that I should briefly mention or are worth briefly mentioning is L1 and L2. So L1 and both have their pros and cons. L1 regularization can add stability, but it improves generalization, but your weights might become zero. Similarly for L2, many weights become small, not all become zero. Why would you want to use these? These help avoid overfitting. So it's helping your model regularize better to your data set. You could simply pass on values like so, L1 and L2. Usually you'd want to pass on both of these values, and you can do it like so with this API. You can look at the math. In my opinion, experimentation is a better way of getting a hang of things. Let's take a look at even further tricks or jargons that are helpful. So if you remember, a neural network is essentially just a collection of numbers, matrices, right? When we had created a deep learning estimator, we didn't look at these numbers. Initially, I didn't even pass the hidden layers. So how do these numbers inside of the neural network get created? There are multiple ways to do that. You could initialize them, you could leave them zero, leave them as zero, but you'd want your model to train faster. So as your errors get sent back, if your first initialization is done nicely, your model will train faster. So here's one way of initializing your model. I've created cars underscore deep learning, trained a model, and copied the weights from this over because I didn't want to go through the pain of setting the dimensions. So if you want to set the initial weights inside of cars underscore deep learning, you can pass on the list like so, along with the biases like so, and your model will initialize itself with these weights and biases. There are a lot of different ways of doing this. This is one of the methods of doing so. But initializing your model with the right weights is helpful and can help it train much faster. You could also set the initial weight distribution so it gets randomly sampled from a uniform distribution. If these words put together don't make sense, that doesn't matter. What you need to understand is there are different ways of understanding your way, initializing your weights, and different options might work nicely for different scenarios. You'd also want to keep a check of how your model is performing. How can you do that? There's something known as cross validation, which essentially creates small folds of your model and evaluates your model on a holdout data set. So essentially takes your data set, divides it into 5 parts, holds out one part of it, and evaluates your model on it. There are different ways of setting it up. What I've done here is randomly assign the folds and set them to 5. Usual values are 3, 5, 7. Some people also set it to 11. 5 is the one that I see a lot on Kaggle. So you can decide the number of folds. It's again a hyperparameter. So that's how you can evaluate your model. One thing with the learning rate, and we had just learned about the learning rate, is as your model gets trained and as it's reaching this minima, you wouldn't want it to step much faster because it might end up overshooting this minima. So you'd want to lower your learning rate as it approaches the minima. For that, you can just set a adaptive learning rate. All you need to do is pass on adaptive rate equals 2 in H23. Now, if you've ever trained a model and gone sword fighting while it's training, and come back to only realize that the power went off or something bad happened, uh, you wouldn't want to go back to sword fighting again. That would annoy your manager. So you'd always, without fail, want to checkpoint your model or your particular estimator. The way to do that in H23, and pro tip, do this always across any experiment that you're running that takes more than 30 minutes because you wouldn't want to train it again. That's not fun. You can simply export a directory and save the checkpoints there. Pro tip, again, this is important, so I'm mentioning it twice. Always checkpoint your models. What I've done here is after this quick walkthrough, just shown a single example of how to train a MNIST dataset. This was actually a homework in the learning center in the foundations course, so please don't share this with the students there. But essentially, when you're working on a problem, it just looks like the following 10 or 12 lines of code. And what I've done here is imported the MNIST dataset, prepared the dataset, and loaded it up into a deep learning estimator, while making sure that I have included all of the things that we had learned. So this is how all of these work together when you're working on a problem. Again, this is a toy problem data set. Even MNIST is a toy problem data set, but the goal here was to showcase how all of these things work together nicely and how you can put or apply these on a training example or a test example. What I would suggest that you can do from here is look at the documentation, start playing around with all of these parameters, start including them, running the same code, changing these values, running this on your own example dataset and changing these values and seeing what happens. So that was a very quick walkthrough of how to train a deep neural network in H2O3. It's obvious that you wouldn't know all of the details of deep learning, but I think this was, in my opinion, okay for you to get started. What I would suggest is just start with the documentations from here and try to understand what's going on. I have a few minutes, so I'll very briefly touch upon different applications of deep learning, the ones that I find exciting, so that this isn't completely disjoint to anything you'd expect, and you can notice where these things are being applied. So I'm covering the broad domains where these are being used. The first one is computer vision, followed by natural language processing and recommender engines and robotics. There are different problems in computer vision. You could classify if your image has a dog or a cat. You could identify the pixels where it exists. You could draw a bounding box around it or do a pixel wise label. These are helpful across different applications. If you look at this loop, which hopefully is playing correctly, assuming my PowerPoint skills work nicely. In a self-driving car, you'd want to understand what's going on the road. Is this a pedestrian? Is this the road? Am I allowed to drive here? Is this a car? Should I move closer to the car? Should I keep running, driving in this path? Those are the questions that the self-driving car is asking, and sometimes you are also asking while you're driving subconsciously. This is done through segmentation. So you'd want to understand images, you'd want to understand video, you'd like to classify different things. You can find different detailed walkthroughs of computer vision on our YouTube channel or on our examples or materials on our website. Please feel free to check them out. We do cover these in quite a good amount of depth. In different industries, computer vision can be used with X-ray images, with defect detection for manufacturing. It can be used to cover retail, insurance use cases in agriculture, uh, and a lot more things. So I haven't even mentioned self-driving cars here. These are the few examples that I am excited about, and I have noticed being these deep learning models being applied to. And again, deep learning isn't the complete solution to all of these. It's just a part of the solution, or it's just part of the answer that's being used here. For NLP, broadly speaking, we can do sentiment analysis. So natural language processing is understanding text, understanding natural language. You could understand the sentiment. You could generate text. You could do language translation. Google Translate uses deep learning. You could build question answering chatbots like the one you see on h2o.ai's website. If you head over to our website, a small icon pops up towards the bottom right. That's a chatbot. And a lot of these chatbots actually use deep learning for understanding your questions. Across different industries, as a retail supplier, you would want to understand if your customers are happy, if they are just trolling, and there are different nuances how a frustrated human being conveys their emotions through the internet. Uh, so you'd want to understand them in a nice format. And if you are a customer or if you are a retailer of a big scale, you'd want to do that effectively and automate that process instead of manually going through them. So you'd want to understand that. If you are writing something or if you're putting some content up anywhere on the internet, you'd like to evaluate its completeness. So you could also do that. A few creative applications that have sprung up include generating product descriptions and language modeling. For structured data, the definitions are again blurred. Images are called unstructured data because they don't have a tabular structure in them. Time series and transactional data is argued to be structured because they can be nicely viewed in an Excel file. So different applications of deep learning where it's being used today across our customers at H2 or across different industries in the world include time series data, tabular data, and recommender engines. So micro stock trading, understanding details about your customers, or just recommending content to them. These are being used across robotics as well. So whenever we see these giant robots in CNBC documentaries, those are actually using computer vision or scene understanding to some extent in order to nicely put things together differently. Not always, but a lot of the times these are being used. In self-driving cars, you'd want to understand what's going out in the real world, and we use deep learning for understanding the computer vision aspect of things. Or in quarantine, if you're fed up, if you've been fed up with cleaning your house, and if you have actually ordered a Roomba or a bot, a robot that cleans up your house, the LiDAR sensors on it actually understand your house and try to map it through an intersection of these algorithms. So even these miniature bots that hopefully wouldn't take over our home someday do use deep learning. If you're interested, you can look at this blog, which is titled Driverless AI Can Help You Choose What to Consume Next. This is by my colleague Parul Pandey. It's an amazing dive into recommender engines. Whenever you're on the internet, a lot of content is being thrown at you. It's being recommended. For example, here are two screenshots. I enjoy watching our Kaggle Grandmaster panels a lot, and YouTube is pretty good at its recommendations, depending on whatever rabbit hole you might go into. YouTube understands that I enjoy watching talks by grandmasters a lot. So as you can see, the recommendations are indeed based on talks by different grandmasters. If you hang out on the internet a lot, you'd want to connect with different people. So here's a screenshot, and I took this incognito to keep it neutral. Here's a recommendation of different people you'd want to connect with based on my profile on LinkedIn. All of these aren't just being provided through just through deep learning algorithms, but deep learning is a part of serving these recommendations to you. So even on Netflix, when you get a percentage match, whenever you're scrolling through and assuming it's not a new show that Netflix is just trying to promote, out of nowhere, you get a percentage match. And that is calculated through different recommender algorithms, which determine how much in an absolute number percentage would you like the show. So all of these recommender systems use different machine learning or AI algorithms, including deep learning. And deep learning does work effectively across all of these applications that I had very briefly touched upon. So this was a very quick overview of a lot of things. Where should you go next from here? I would argue you can head over to Kaggle and get started right now. You can start applying these ideas to a competition. Don't expect to do very well. A lot of smart people hang out on Kaggle, but it should give you a good taste of how can you apply these to different problems. If you'd like to learn more, you can check out H2O3. You can check out the tutorials on our website or take the machine learning or AI foundations course. All of these are free resources. So you can head over to training.h2o.ai and you can find 2 courses. Unfortunately, I have taken a few lectures there. Fortunately for you, a lot of the Kaggle Grandmasters from our team have taught a lot of lectures. So the former number 1, the current number 3 in competition steer, and a few more Grandmasters in the top 100 of world rankings have taught lectures in these courses about these topics and even beyond. So if you'd like, you can head over there and start learning, or I would say just start applying the terms that I just mentioned in the last few minutes to problems that are of interest to you as well. That pretty much concludes all of the things that I wanted to discuss. Hopefully we do have a few more minutes left, so I'm happy to take any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sayam. Can you give any pro tip for solving time series and forecasting problems?
Great question. I haven't worked extensively across these, so I would suggest looking at different ARIMA models, or there are many open source frameworks. The one I really like is Profit by Facebook. You can start with the examples there and go from there.
Thank you. In Python, when I convert a pandas frame containing more than 9 million rows to H2O frame, it adds 1 extra column. Where am I going wrong?
In your code.
Do you want to take it?
I would have to look at the code to debug it, but I assume, and I remember debugging this, so maybe you're not converting the title properly. The column headers might be causing the mistake.
Thank you. Could deep learning be applied in a regression problem? Which one is better, decision trees or deep learning on the regression problem?
Great question. There's not a fine line in my opinion. And what ends up being used, if you watch any of the driverless AI tutorials, at the end of any good model, you'd have an ensemble. So you'd want decision trees, you'd also want deep learning, you'd want a collection of these, or maybe none of these, depending on the problem. The problem I mentioned just now, if you scroll through Netflix, which I assume everyone is doing a lot right now, you get a number which tells you in percentage how much of the show you might like, which works nicely most of the time. So that's a regression problem. And I know that just by reading the Netflix blogs that deep learning is being used there. So it can be used. Should you use that? You need domain expertise for that.
Thank you. I work with satellite images. How do I use deep learning for image segmentation and classifications?
You spend a lot on AWS builds and you hope that things work. That's the first step. But realistically, you could look at different unit models or different models that exist in the PyTorch ecosystem. I know the upcoming driverless AI version will include segmentation features as well, so you could keep an eye out for that. There have been different problems on Kaggle, so you could look at the winning solutions from their different segmentation problems. Those should be helpful.
Thank you. Does H2O platform inherit the AutoML spirit in it? Does it help to optimize the activation functions or neural architectural search for us in the backend?
Yes, it does. So H2O3 just takes care of the AutoML stuff for you. And as a disclaimer, it does not do feature engineering. So that's one part you would have to do yourself. But you can run a grid search. I didn't do that because I had 16 GB RAM and no patience. If you have more RAM and more patience, you could do that. And there are a lot more features that I didn't cover. Deep learning is actually the smallest part of the different algorithms that we support right now.
Thank you. Where does the AutoML stand for multi-product time series prediction?
Personally, I haven't. I can't recall a good example of this off the top of my head. But in theory, you should be able to apply it. It's again a simple time series problem. It's not simple, but it's just a time series problem.
Thank you. Does the latest version of H2O open source platform support image regression?
No, H2O3 does not support image regression, but driverless AI 9 supports image models.
Thank you. How is H2O different than other deep learning libraries?
That's a great question, and that's one question that I'd expected someone would ask. At the end of the day, the framework doesn't matter. I covered H2O3 because I know it to an okay extent. Once you know these jargons, you can take any framework, and if you know the understanding, if you have the understanding of these, you should be able to apply these. Rohan Rao, Kaggle Grandmaster and data scientist at H2 is running Ask Me Anything on Twitter. And I saw his tweet last week, which said that you should know both TensorFlow and PyTorch. You should know all of these tools. So these are just tools in your toolbox. Should you use a bigger screwdriver for a small screw? No. Should you use a small screwdriver for a big screw? No. Depending on the example, depending on the problem, H2O3 might work nicely, PyTorch might work nicely, or none of these would work nicely. So you should know the theory and how to apply these. And the framework, again, is just one tool to help you get there.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sayam. We require, where we require interpretability tree, will H2O be good in cases deep learning lags?
So first thing, there are two questions in there. You can interpret deep learning models as well. Inside of H2O3, you can also look at feature importance for different algorithms. I don't think there's one way to do it with deep learning because that's not how deep learning works. But you could interpret these, and in general, you'd always want to interpret results or different feature importances for different models.
Thank you. Can an ensemble model be a weak learner when we do stacking?
I'm not sure. I haven't experimented thoroughly with doing both of these together.
Great. So you know where to find Sayam. He's very popular on Twitter, on LinkedIn. Please go bug him. He'll be able to find a solution for you. Next question we have, what is the difference between Spark, multiprocessor computing, and GPU for deep learning training?
Again, I'll have to get back to that answer. I'm not 100% sure of that.
No worries. Thank you, Sayam. How do you use transfer learning with H2O3 deep learning estimator?
We actually have a webinar next week on this, so I'll answer that in an hour-long format next week. But transfer learning, you could, so the example I had shown earlier of copying over weights from a different model, I was just doing transfer learning there. I didn't mention the term because I didn't want to add more to the list. You could simply copy over weights from a model that you already have, import it to H2O3, and use those as a reference.
Thank you. And the meetup Sayam just mentioned is on next Tuesday. You should be hearing from us on one of the platforms that you subscribe to. Next question, what is the difference between mini batch size and n folds? I'm assuming this goes back to one of the use cases that you were talking about.
So mini batch size determines how small of a batch size you'd create to feed into your memory. That's completely different from number of folds. So number of folds decides how many number of times would you want to divide your data set while evaluating it for its accuracy. So you'd want to hold out one fold from your model. Your model doesn't get to see it, and you evaluate it based on that, so that you know that your model is functioning as it is intended to, and hot dogs are hot dogs and not cats and dogs.
Thank you. Let's take one last question. How can H2O be integrated with commercial databases for real-time batch running of models and distribution of outputs?
I'm not 100% sure. I know the tools. We have a few tools in the open source ecosystem. You could look at Mojo pipelines, which are supported by H2O3, or you could look at Sparkling Water as well. All of these integrate nicely into each other. Personally, I haven't tried that myself, so I'm not sure if I'll be able to answer that in depth.
Very well. Thank you, Sayam. With that, we're at the top of the hour. We'll stop. And thank you to our audience for attending, asking all these wonderful questions.